Yo, Plane, you better shut the fuck up. I'm about to talk about Gareth Edwards leaving Godzilla. This shit happened a week ago, and I still haven't done a video on it. Somebody somewhere is pissed, and I'm gonna fucking satisfy them. I'm sorry, that one person. Please don't kill anyone else. Hello everyone, I am Zazubaar, and yes, Gareth Edwards has left Godzilla 2, but we'll get to that. As always, I usually like to front load these things with a lot of superfluous exposition before we get to the actual piece of news that I'm here to discuss, so why change that tradition now? So, I'm here to do an update video on what's been going on with Legendary Pictures' Godzilla series, aka their now slowly developing kaiju monster-based cinematic universe that's to feature the likes of King Kong, Rodan, Mothra, King Ghidorah, potentially Mechagodzilla if an old quote by Gareth Edwards is still in any way at play about how he wants like humanity to try and recreate Godzilla's power, and I always interpreted that as Mechagodzilla, but anyway, he's out of the picture now, so who fucking cares what that British asshole had to say? But again, we'll get to that superfluous exposition. So I've been gone for a while, especially in terms of doing solo videos, and I'm not even going to attempt to address my disappearance or my little hiatus at the moment, because there's so much Godzilla news to talk about. You know, this all kind of started, this flood of information. Not flood of information. In fact, I almost didn't do a video on this because of like the real lack of detail about this information, but there's been a bunch of sort of important updates regarding this universe, and I've neglected to do a video on it partially out of being fucking exhausted with some other stuff that was going on, but also just because, to quote Dr. Carrington from The Thing from Another World, a character who probably nobody watching this remembers, or maybe all of you know, I don't know, I'm not in your head, he said, "I dislike being vague," and that's kind of how I felt about this news, where it was like, okay, but what am I going to talk about? So, let's talk about it then. If there's so little to talk about, why not just delve into it? So, Warner Brothers has changed the dates of Godzilla 2, and they've announced the official release date for Godzilla vs. Kong, which just had a year prior to this. And they announced that like a week and a half ago, I'm going to say. My time on this is so fucked up because I've been a little busy. You know, you lose track of movie news sometimes. Get off my back, one person who killed someone, maybe, or maybe not. Anyway, so this happened like a week and a half ago, and again, when it happened, I was like, well, should I do a video on that? Should I talk about that at all? I mean, what does it mean, really? So, the date for Godzilla 2, and god damn it, I had this written down and I left my phone on the other side of the room, so I'm just going to go from my memory. Godzilla 2 was March 22nd, 2019, I believe. That's where they moved the release date to. Prior to that, I believe it was... because, you know, we did a whole podcast on DFOS about this last year. The prior release date, I believe, was May 22nd, 2018, which was the same, like, ballpark release area as Jurassic World 2 and a couple of other big event movies, which Godzilla 2 has still managed to fall into with this new release date. But even at the time, that was, like, the debate of the time was, why would Legendary, who both produces Jurassic World and Godzilla, put those two similar franchises out around the same time and dip into each other's markets, if they even would have. Again, we debated about that, and now it's not even at play, so why are we even discussing it? So, and I forget like the other event movies that Godzilla 2 now clashes with, which is, with its March 22nd, 2019 release date. Now, I think it'd be less anyway, because March isn't like... well, I mean, I say this, but like March isn't really your big event movie month, but you know, this year Warner Brothers also put out a big event movie in March of Batman v Superman, and there's a lot of like potentially terrifying terrifying parallels to Batman v Superman with this Godzilla news, because Batman v Superman also changed its release date to a year after it was initially supposed to be released. That movie was supposed to come out in like May of 2015 or something, and they ended up moving it to March of 2016 for God knows what reason. I forget exactly what they said back in 2014 when they announced that. But seeing this news with Godzilla 2's release date shifting a year later kind of made me go, oh, that's interesting that these two cinematic universes that they're attempting to set up with these two sequels both had that. And then they announced that Gareth Edwards had left Godzilla 2, and I was like, what's going on over there, guys? That's crazy interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. Because the reasons why they said that Gareth Edwards left Godzilla 2 are, and again, this is sort of, I didn't read a quote from either party, either Warner or any of the parties, Warner Brothers, Legendary, Gareth Edwards himself, anybody, as to why exactly he left, or why exactly he's not on the project anymore. The reports, like, I read, like, some, like, fucking, like, telegraphed shit from my source in Hollywood. I read it on fucking Google on my phone. The article that I read said that it was an amicable separation between Warner Brothers, Legendary, and Gareth Edwards, or Legendary or Warner Brothers, are now back together, sort of, I guess, with their, you know, bringing Kong's franchise from Universal under Warner Brothers. Anyway, point being, they separated from Gareth Edwards, and apparently it was all well and good, because that's what amicable means in Hollywood. It's like, oh, we're all well and good. But really, that's key. Usually when you see amicable separation, that's usually a key, like a flag for creative differences. And we've seen this recently in Hollywood anyway, with stuff like Ant-Man, which lost Edgar Wright, like a little less than a year, no, way less than a year before that started shooting. And that was like the same thing, amicable differences. It was a nice, pleasant separation. But really, it was just because there were creative differences. Edgar Wright didn't want to connect back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe as much as Marvel wanted, or at all maybe, I don't know. And for that reason, he left the project. And I'm not saying that that's definitely what happened here. I'm just saying that seeing amicable separation, excuse me, I don't want to, you know, put words into people I haven't heard speak those words' mouths. I usually think creative differences, and the reason why I especially think that with this is because of also the other reasons why Gareth Edwards supposedly left the project, and again, parallels to Batman v Superman and the DC Extended Universe getting off the ground over at Warner Brothers. So, let's start with why Gareth Edwards said he left. So, and again, amicable differences aside or whatever, amicable separation. Apparently he wants to focus on smaller projects, and apparently he's had several smaller projects brewing under the surface of his big budget work these past couple years with Godzilla, and recently with Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which looks fucking awesome, by the way. I think I talked about that. We talked about that in SOS and DFOS, so if you follow my regular stuff, you know I enjoyed that. But for those of you who don't, I enjoyed Rogue One, a Star Wars story. The trailer. Point being, Gareth Edwards wants to do smaller stuff outside of all that flowing white cape and 70s technology shot with modern cameras looking stuff, and wants to go back to doing smaller movies, and for that reason has apparently left the Godzilla series. And going back to the quote, amicable separation, again, thinking creative differences, that sort of seems to line up then, that in the preparation or discussions about the direction of Godzilla 2, something made him go, I don't want to work on these big budget projects right now. I want to focus on these other smaller projects. So that says to me that, I mean, obviously Godzilla 2 is going to be a big movie. I mean, it's a Godzilla movie. Large-scaled size is sort of implied. But, you know, more than that, we already knew that it was going to feature Mothra, King Ghidorah, and Rodan. So, and apparently, at several points, I also heard rumors of, like, new monsters in the midst of that. Whatever, we know it's going to be a big movie with a lot of characters and a lot of destruction and a lot of big set pieces and a lot of fighting and a lot of intense science fiction, you know, intense, you know, big Hollywood event movie production type of stuff. And I guess Gareth Edwards didn't want to deal with that at the moment. But that also makes me, to go to the Batman v Superman parallels with this, also working on that amicable separation, creative differences, big Hollywood production versus wanting to do a smaller thing side of this. I think maybe Gareth Edwards wasn't on board with the whole, we're going to turn this into a big monster cinematic universe. Maybe that and again, that's my own conjecture based on all this, based on all these different strands of what different people said and what the different reasons were for certain things happening. But I suspect that Warner Brothers and him have been talking for a while about what the fuck to do with that Godzilla sequel. Because I imagine there may be some reluctance on their part on what to do with it exactly, because yes, 2014 was successful, And yes, Gareth Edwards was given a lot of the credit for it being successful by the people who liked it and by the people who saw it, but there was also a lot of backlash. I mean, again, I think by and large 2014, both by the Godzilla fandom and by the general public, is looked back upon with a certain degree of, like, you know, of positive vibes. And what am I trying to say? Well, you know, it was a success. I mean, people look back on it and go, the movie made money, people liked it by and large. But, and that's the thing with 2014, you always have to go, but it also has a lot of problems as a film, but regardless of that, a lot of people have a lot of problems with it as a film. And I think that Warner Brothers is well aware of that. And there was also that guy who was at a Warner Brothers booth, and I think he had, if I remember the story correctly, he had, like, helped set up the Godzilla Experience exhibit. I think that's what it was called. That was put out, like, the summer before 2014 came out. And summer of 2013, I guess that would be, yeah. And he had said, and this is after 2014 was released, of course, but that's who he was. He helped set that up the year before 2014 came out. Somebody asked him, like, is anything for Godzilla 2 here? And he's like, no, but you're going to get exactly what you want. And I guess that was directed at the fans. I guess he kind of figured he would be quoted, maybe. I don't know what the story was, but basically that seemed to imply to people, and there was a bunch of articles about this at the time, we're going to get a lot more monster action than in the first one, and a lot more Godzilla screen time. Because again, that was really the thing that really people were beating Godzilla 2014 over the head for, was lack of Godzilla and monster action and screen times, particularly in regards to Godzilla. A lot of people were like, the Mutos kind of stole the show and wanted Godzilla to take more center stage. So I have a feeling that that's what we're likely to get. And I think that maybe Gareth Edwards wasn't on board for that. And I think that these amicable separations we're now hearing about could potentially be a result of that, and a result of, well, the monsters are going to take more center stage because they're trying to set up this universe. Maybe there's a lack of, like, maybe not a lack, but maybe a lack of, like, focus on, well, we're going to keep telling this grounded human story that Edwards started telling in the first movie about the Brody family. And I think that maybe the direction of the sequels and the direction of this universe is moving away from that. And maybe Gareth Edwards wasn't on board with that. Let's talk about that side of it for just a second then. And then we'll get back to the Batman v Superman parallels and what that could potentially mean for these movies quality-wise. But let's talk about the element of this in terms of grounded human story, which Gareth Edwards is clearly more interested in, given why he's leaving the franchise. Just smaller scale stuff, I mean, not even necessarily that in particular, the human small scale story, but just smaller grounded stuff as opposed to big crazy stuff, versus that element of it, the big crazy stuff, the monster action, the over-the-top science fiction elements. I'm of two minds about Edwards leaving because maybe Warner Brothers is pushing more for the big over-the-top crazy stuff. Because I got two mindsets about it, because you got to think of where people's mindsets were before 2014 came out. You got to think about the videos that myself and other YouTubers and just a whole bunch of other people did in terms of what we wanted before we knew, even when we knew nothing about 2014, what exactly the direction that a lot of fans wanted it to take. And the direction that fans wanted it to take was keep it like the original, grounded, realistic, dark story with those science fiction elements overhanging. And then, when that's exactly what Warner Brothers made, maybe not, and again, I'm not saying that, like, oh, the fans asked for it, so they got it, and they didn't want it when they got it. Well, yeah, a little bit, but I think that was not on the fans, that was not the fans' fault. That was on the fault of the production company and the studio and the people who made the movie, because they didn't exactly execute it, I think, the way that people wanted. They had the right idea, but maybe the story that they told didn't necessarily reflect what exactly people meant when they said, grounded human story with science fiction backdrop. And I reviewed 2014 for 3 hours, so I'm not going to fucking talk about that now. But I think that's where the conflict came in with the fans, was you had the right idea, but you just didn't do the right stuff with that idea. And I think that Warner Brothers, in an attempt to reconcile that, is going to go bigger and crazier with the monster action. And again, I'm of two minds about it, because I still feel that pre-2014 mindset of the human story is very important to making these movies watchable. Because when you go back to the Godzilla franchise, you know, and especially when you introduce it to people nowadays, you know, especially people who are, you know, fucking adults, and you show them a classic Godzilla movie, a lot of them just cannot get into the human story and are just fucking either bored by it, find it completely laughable, or just can't follow it. And again, it depends on the movie. The better ones tend to have a cohesive, you know, clear, enjoyable human narrative to complement the monster action. And those are the ones that hold up, and those are, in my opinion, the best Godzilla movies. And the one, you know, of course there are exceptions where there's just insane monster action and the human story doesn't make any sense. I mean, I fucking love Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but that human story, of course, isn't necessarily the most grounded, realistic, dramatic thing I've ever seen. But anyway, I think that, you know, there needs to be that. There has to be a grounded human story that's good in there somewhere in order to make these things watchable. But at the same time, yeah, 2014 could have used a couple more explosions, or at least a little bit more Godzilla causing some explosions, I think, is where fans will probably be more aiming towards with the sequels, is just seeing Godzilla do more stuff. And I think we're likely to get that with this new direction that Warner Brothers seems to be pushing for. And again, I'm not saying that Gareth Edwards just left because Warner Brothers wants to do more stuff with the monsters and less stuff with the people. That's my conjecture. But it seems to line up with, again, what everybody has said about it. And with the shift in release date, now let's get to the Batman v Superman parallels. This is kind of looking like it might be a Man of Steel Batman v Superman situation. Because, again, this is just all surface aesthetic things that are lining up between these two franchises that kind of make me nervous. And again, I'll tell you why they make me nervous, and it's not just because they're similar with these aesthetic things. Again, it's been pushed back a year from its release date. Again, who cares? 2014 itself was pushed back 2 years. That was supposed to come out in 2012, although that was more up in the air than this was. That never had a set release date. This did. But even still, movies get pushed back all the time. Usually it's for the better. I mean, 2014, who knows what we would have gotten if that movie would have come out in 2012. Maybe it would have been, you know, 10 times fucking worse than, you know, the enjoyable romp that it was. I always feel like I have to fucking, like, stop whenever I talk about 2014 and go, I still like it. Because, like, there's been so many things said about it now. But anyway, I do like 2014. I'm not going to say that again. Let's just move on. Man, I'm all over the place. I haven't done a video in a while, so, you know, this is what happens. But movies get pushed back all the time. But the other thing that these two things have in common that I'm more to sort of comparing them for and I'm nervous about is that they are both movies that were just made. They were both franchises. They started out as movies. You had Man of Steel and Godzilla 2014. Two movies that were both made at similar times, made by the same studios. Legendary and Warner Brothers both put out Man of Steel, partially. Legendary had less direct involvement with Man of Steel than they did with Godzilla 2014, although production elements of Man of Steel did influence Godzilla 2014. Godzilla and the Muto, in some early drafts, you can read this in the Art of Destruction concept art book if you ever get that. It's pretty great if you do want to get your hands on it. It's interesting. Especially the Godzilla designs that they tried before the one they had, because goddamn, they really did kind of pick the best one. So you had, it was like, he was supposed to be found in ice, you know, as opposed to the beginning with the bones in the Philippines, and they didn't do that because of Man of Steel having that scene where Clark Kent finds the old Kryptonian ship up in the North Pole or wherever the fuck that was supposed to be. And they cut that because it was so similar to that scene in Man of Steel. So these franchises have already influenced each other, or one has influenced the other, even prior to this comparison I'm about to make, which is Man of Steel was not a movie made initially with the idea of, we're going to set up a DC cinematic universe with this movie. That was decided after the film had already finished shooting and was already in the can. They decided that during post-production. I think that's when they first decided we're going to put the Wayne Tech satellite up in and have Zod crash into it. And decisions like that were made. Point being, it was the DC Extended Universe, as it's now known, with Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman and all that stuff in there now, was not an idea that they were trying to set up when they had first started making Man of Steel, and it wasn't until way after the fact that they decided to do that. And with Godzilla 2014, if you watch those special features on the Blu-ray, they talk a lot about how they're like, we weren't really thinking about sequels when we made this movie. We just wanted to make a good standalone movie. And 2014 is very self-contained. By and large, there is like a little bit of like, oh, there might be more Mutos out there. They might wake up at any time. But whatever. That is a fairly simple A to B story, or A to Z story, I guess is how you would call it. Like more than 2 nodes that they travel through. Whatever. Metaphors. Who fucking cares? I'm aggressive towards metaphors for some reason. But it's a simple story, and it's very self-contained. Godzilla shows up, he solves a problem, and then he fucking disappears. That's the plot of that movie broken down, and some shit happens around that. And again, there is a beauty in its simplicity, but that's not necessarily like a really strong setup for a cinematic universe. It could potentially be. I'm not saying like, and I'm not saying that you have to like do a Marvel thing where you plan out years in advance, like, oh, we're gonna set up to a crossover between a bunch of these movies we're gonna make. You can kind of do it on the fly. I mean, it's been done before. I can't fucking think of an example right now, but I'm sure it has been. I don't think that it's completely it's not completely necessary that prior to making Godzilla 2014, Edwards and Warner Brothers sat down and said, we're going to cross this over with King Kong and we're going to have a bunch of sequels. Being a Godzilla reboot, I'm sure that was in the cards, but in terms of sequels, maybe not the Kong thing at the time. But sequels were in the cards, but that wasn't the focus. That wasn't the thing that they were thinking about. So now that is what they're setting up, again, back to Batman v Superman, now that the movie is out and now that we're starting to work on the sequel, we're quickly trying to put in all these ideas of setting up a big cinematic universe with multiple films and spin-offs and all these different aspects of it outside of this first thing that we made that we didn't know we were going to try and put in when we made the first thing. And that can always spell disaster in terms of continuity and inconsistencies and wildly different tones, and just having a convoluted plot that tries to do too much in one movie. And that's the parallel to Batman v Superman that I'm trying to make. I don't think that if you watch my spoiler analysis that I did with the SOS of Batman v Superman, you know that I didn't like it. But for those of you watching who have been hearing me mention it throughout the video, I'll just say I did not like Batman v Superman. I saw it 3 times, and each time was a bad experience for a different reason. But I'm not here to beat that movie any more than I already did. It's been severely beaten by many other people, way better than I did. So, and I know that a lot of people did enjoy it. Some of them may be watching, so, you know, I'm sorry. No. You can like it. I mean, there's nothing that I can say or do to stop you. So, or is there? But probably not. That movie did not work for me. So comparing that experience and that setup of how we got that experience to this Godzilla stuff is a bit worrying to me, because again, it's similar in that now we're trying to set up this universe. Now we're trying to introduce all these other monsters and all these other aspects of this universe that we hadn't wanted to put in before. Now, part of the nice thing is that 2014 is such a simple story, and it's so rather open-ended that you can pretty much do whatever you want. I mean, and Man of Steel sort of was as well, but this even more so to me. Like, Edwards pretty much left it open for anyone to do whatever they wanted. Maybe he did that on purpose because he wasn't sure if he was going to stick around. But here's the thing. Here's my opinion on all this. After all this I told you, superfluous exposition, building to all of this, here's my opinion. This could either go really bad or this could be great, because, again, there's all those concerns about setting up a cinematic universe or any kind of extended story with something that wasn't supposed to be an extended story initially. Yeah, that's all there. But we have no indication of, you know, what these people were going to do with this universe after the fact of the current moment. That's partially why I didn't necessarily want to do this video. I don't know what they're planning to do with this universe. I saw a like behind the scenes sort of making of Kong Skull Island that I kind of wanted to do a video on, but decided not to just because it was way after the fact. And that looks good too. I mean, everything I see from that looks totally fine. The cast looks great. It looks really interesting visually. And I'm very interested to see what that thing's about story-wise, given all the military presence in it. But so far, so good from this universe. I have no reason to doubt it, except the experience I had with Batman v Superman and the experience of this studio trying to set up a cinematic universe after they've already put out something and then try to go from there, even though they weren't going to go there in the first place. So that's where my hesitation comes, but I'm also kind of excited to see somebody else come in and do something else with Godzilla after Edwards did. Again, because that movie is so open-ended, and because some of the things that don't work about it are its use of the Godzilla mythos, but it does introduce the Godzilla mythos into a modern-day setting in a well-made, entertaining action movie that a lot of people did like. And to me, that's sort of exciting. I like Gareth Edwards. I like him as a person. I make fun of his voice constantly, but that's just because it's hilarious. My voice is funny too, so it's cool, Gareth Edwards, if you're watching for some reason. Smaller scale productions means smaller scale YouTube watching. I mean, that's just what happens. So he'll watch videos of guys with a little over 2,000 subscribers talking about the ins and outs of his movies for like an hour. He'll watch that. He's got nothing better to do. He doesn't have Star Wars movies to make in post-production. So assuming that Gareth Edwards is watching, here's what I'd like to say. I like you, dude. I liked your movie. I loved it when I first saw it, and I liked it a lot more successively to that when I saw it in theaters, and then had some reservations about it later, and then did a 3-hour review of it that you can watch if you'd like to, Mr. Edwards. I wouldn't advise it. It's long, and I was kind of sick when I made it, so you know, there's that. But you can watch it. It's out there. And because of that, I was also sort of like, well, I'm sad that he's not going to do it because we have somebody who has a proven pedigree, who made a decent Godzilla movie, now leaving the franchise, and it's like, well, is Warner Brothers going to devolve into garbage? I think that's entirely possible given what happened with Batman v Superman and the spiel I just went on. But again, I'm excited to see what somebody else is going to do with this mythos given that setup. Given that very open-ended, you could basically do whatever you want with Godzilla now kind of setup. I'm kind of excited. That's why I was also sort of like, when I saw the news, I was sort of like, okay. I wasn't like, oh my god, I can't believe that happened, I have to do a video on it. I was sort of just like, I'd like to see where this goes. I'd like to see how this develops. This has really not affected me in any great way whatsoever, and again, I thought that was weird. And part of it is also just, man, they are taking forever to get this universe going. And people have talked about that with DC as well, and I'm not going to get into that here, but I don't know, 2014 came out 2 years ago, and time moves so much quicker now with the internet and everything, and the rate at which, you know, things become obsolete or outdated or, you know, too far in the past to really be relevant to discuss anymore. That's why I feel like kind of a fucking dumbass for making this video now, because all this happened so long ago. It's like, well, how relevant are people gonna find my thoughts on it? How new and how, you know, fresh are they gonna see it so long after the fact? I don't fucking know, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I'm Zazubaar, and what other reason do I have to live for? I mean, that's the real question, kids. But I guess the reason that I could live for is to find out what this new guy does with, or new girl, does with the Godzilla franchise. I kind of hope Warner Brothers has an idea of who they'd like to get to direct both this and Godzilla vs. Kong. Haven't really talked about that yet. But because we also got the release date for that, which I don't know if I said it earlier, but they announced the release date for that at the same time as Godzilla 2's changed release date. And Godzilla vs. Kong's, I believe, was May 29th, 2020, which is 4 years away. And this stuff isn't really that far away when you think about it. It's 3 years for Godzilla 2. Well, technically, it's a year for Kong Skull Island, so we are going to get something from this universe next year. But then it's 2 years for Godzilla 2 and 3 years, you know, it's a year after Godzilla 2 for Godzilla vs. Kong, 4 years from now. But anyway, so we are getting stuff in this universe soon, so we'll get a better sense of the expansion of it with Kong Skull Island and kind of see where that goes. I'm also kind of nervous about that movie, though, just because that had started production before it was decided that that was going to be in the Godzilla 2014 universe, so we should probably be on the lookout for some massive inconsistencies there. But again, we'll just have to see, and that's just the ultimate thing with all this. We'll just have to see. But my point with this video is that maybe, I think I saw a lot of this on Facebook. There's a lot of people who are really upset about both of these pieces of news. In terms of the release date changing and Gareth Edwards leaving, there's been like talk of like, oh, he abandoned the fans and all that kind of, you know, sort of ridiculous stuff about, you know, movie news that people take really personally. But again, I just sort of took it like, let's see what happens with this. This is kind of interesting. And that's the mindset I still have. Again, I like Gareth Edwards. I would have maybe liked, I would have liked to have seen a sequel to his movie directed by him. I would have liked to have seen where he went with it, especially that idea he said about humanity making their own Godzilla. He had an interesting take on the Godzilla universe, and he had a good enough knowledge of it and what the fans like about it to put out a decent movie, and I think go somewhere even more decent than what he had initially. So I am slightly disappointed to see him leave and not get to see what he does with it. But again, we're gonna get something different now, hopefully. Something maybe a little bit more close to your more science fiction based Godzilla stories. With Ghidorah being in it, I think that that's kind of inherent. It's hard to do a Godzilla movie with Ghidorah in it and not have it be a little heavy on the science fiction. But I mean, then you've got Mothra in there, and that could dip into the mystical. And, you know, of course, Rodan, Rodan's kind of on the same level in terms of weirdness with Godzilla, just sort of like, I mean, it's a prehistoric animal in the modern age, that's kind of off, but it's not as off as a space dragon or a mystical fairy moth. It's slightly less off than those things. Like, we can slightly more accept prehistoric animals in the modern age than we can mystical fairy gods that look like moths and dragons from space with 3 heads that shoot lightning and are inexplicably powered by the sun, which is never stated in any of the films that dragon appears in, but is stated as a fact in the trivia for Godzilla on several different websites. Who knows, man? Who knows? But I guess we'll find out when these movies come out, and I'm excited to find out. I'm not going to do story speculation or anything on this, because I have nothing to say that I haven't already said in regards to the movie featuring all the monsters that it's featured, or Godzilla vs. Kong. All I know is that with Edwards leaving, I'd like to see a different tone, and I'm excited to see the direction the series will take now, with this cinematic universe idea being more focused now. And again, I think that the shift in release date will give them more time to streamline that concept, and maybe a new director will be more on board with that idea and hopefully make something better with it than Edwards would have, because maybe he wasn't so on board with expanding this universe out to such an extent. Again, I don't know if that's true, but I think that lines up with these things, and I think that we'll get a more entertaining and probably better adaptation of this universe with somebody who is more on board with going bigger as this franchise goes along. But I don't know. Maybe it will be better if it stayed smaller and didn't go too crazy with the amount of monsters and the amount of destruction and the amount of screen time that all the monsters get. Who fucking knows, man? We may never know. But I'm excited for the potential of all of it, and I hope you are too. So, I don't know, what do you think? There were also a lot of people who were like, fuck yes, get that dickhead out of there. We hate Godzilla 2014. Because again, the movie does have a large negative following, aside from largely being seen as a success by people. So there were a great many people who were like, yeah, fuck off. We're very happy with this. Get somebody who knows how to fucking put Godzilla in a movie called Godzilla. So I think that those fans will be happy, certainly. I'm ultimately hoping for the most amount of Godzilla fans to be made happy by this next movie as possible, and hopefully I'll be one of them. That's all you can hope for. So let's get excited about a potentially new direction. Let's get excited about the potential of this cinematic universe. And let's just hope that Gareth Edwards is happy making those smaller movies, man. Because small movies are important too. but they don't make as many millions of dollars, so ultimately they're not as important. So Gareth Edwards, you're probably going to be forgotten and die homeless in a box one day, so what are you going to do? Just trying not to get killed by that fan of mine who may or may not have killed somebody because I didn't do a video on this. That's a mistake you'll never make twice. Well, I hope you enjoyed my return to solo on-camera videos and the return of my Hawaiian shirt. I like this shirt a lot. I don't know if I've ever worn it in a video before, but I will definitely wear it again, especially if it bothers people. I'm going to wear it every time then. But I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Godzilla 2 and all these whisperings about the Godzilla Kong cinematic multiverse and all that stuff that I also discussed with a whole bunch of other crap around it. So I don't know how long this video ended up being, but damn it, I hope you enjoyed it, because I sure did. I haven't talked on camera in a long time. So look forward to more of me rambling in the future if you enjoy that sort of thing. I know that a couple of you do, so I look forward to continue to entertaining those couple of people and hope that they don't also start killing people because I don't do videos. So again, what more can you hope for? Well, kids, I bid you adieu. Sayonara.